Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you. I make my living spotting errors in fraud files. But that night, the biggest anomaly was my mother's voice. A backpack I was told not to open. An accident, missing from the hospital system. Just one item in the side pocket made a desk sergeant turned pale as a ghost. In that freezing moment, I understood the absolute truth. My family did not call me to save my brother. They called to bury me in his place. My name is Riley Hall. I am 34 years old, and for the last 8 years, my entire professional life has been built on looking for the things other people try desperately to hide. As a senior fraud reviewer at North Mutual Risk Services, a massive insurance firm right here in Indianapolis, my job is to find the single loose thread in a perfectly woven lie. I look for the mismatched timestamp on a tow truck receipt, a duplicated signature on a medical claim, or the slight hesitation in a claimant's recorded statement. I see the anomalies, the tiny glitches in the matrix that everyone else glosses over because they are too busy or too trusting. It is a highly lucrative skill in the corporate world. My bosses love me. Unfortunately, this exact same skill is an absolute curse when it comes to dealing with my own family. In the whole household, our roles were assigned early and written in stone. I was the designated load-bearing killer, the responsible adult tasked with fixing problems since I was about 10 years old. My younger brother, Mason, on the other hand, was the delicate glass ornament that required constant, exhausting protection. It truly did not matter that Mason was now a fully grown man who left a catastrophic trail of blown bank accounts, wrecked vehicles, and messy legal infractions in his wake. Every single time he shattered his life into pieces, my parents expected me to drop everything, sweep up the sharp edges, and bleed so they would not have to. I was the fixer. He was the victim of circumstance. That was the unshakable dynamic. The phone rang at exactly 4:17 in the morning. The harsh mechanical vibration against the wood of my nightstand dragged me violently out of a deep sleep. I did not even need to look at the bright caller ID screen to know it was trouble. Nobody in the history of the world calls at 4 in the morning to share good news or ask how your week is going. Riley, you need to wake up right now. It was my mother, Audrey Hall. Her voice was frantic, pitched high with panic. Yet, as the last remnants of sleep faded from my brain, my professional instincts kicked in. Her tone lacked the raw, ragged edge of genuine, debilitating shock. It sounded rehearsed. It sounded exactly like a performance of a mother in distress. A little too measured and a little too perfect for a woman who had supposedly just been jolted awake by a horrific tragedy. "Mom, what is it? What time is it?" I rasped, sitting up and pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. "It is Mason," she breathed heavily into the receiver, pacing her words. "He was in an accident, a terrible, horrific accident down in Kentucky. He is in the hospital. Riley, it is incredibly bad." My stomach dropped and the familiar, exhausting, icy dread washed over my chest. "What happened? Is he awake? Can he talk?" "Your father is on the other line with the police and the insurance company right now." She rushed on, entirely ignoring my questions about her son's physical state. "It is a massive mess, Riley, a total disaster. Grant is losing his mind trying to handle the authorities." The specific mention of my father, Grant Hall, dealing frantically with cops and insurance agents, immediately elevated the situation in my mind. But my analytical brain, the part that assessed risk and dissection for 40 hours a week, caught a massive snag. If this was a true medical emergency, you talk to the doctors. You talk to the trauma surgeons. You pray. You absolutely do not prioritize insurance adjusters and local authorities while your child is bleeding out on a hospital gurney. It made zero sense. "I am getting dressed," I told her, throwing the heavy blankets off my legs and standing in the cold room. "Tell me which hospital. I will drive down there right now." "Listen to me carefully," Audrey said, her tone suddenly shifting. The performance of the weeping mother vanished, replaced by a sharp, commanding edge. "We packed a bag for him. We gathered all his absolute essentials. I need you to swing by our house, pick it up, and drive it down to him." I stopped moving, holding my sweater in midair. Why do I need to be the courier for a bag? Why are you and Dad not getting in the car and driving down there right this second? We have to stay right here to sort out the legal end with the towing company and the adjusters," she snapped, her patience evaporating instantly. "Plus, you know exactly how Mason is. He is terrified. He will not let the nurses touch him or examine him. He only listens to his big sister. He needs you. Riley, you have to go." I pinched the bridge of my nose, fighting the dull headache blossoming behind my eyes. "Fine. Give me the basic details. What is the exact name of the attending physician? Which wing is he in? Is he in the intensive care unit or general trauma?" A heavy, tense silence stretched over the cellular network. Then I heard a theatrical, aggrieved sigh. "I do not have all those tiny details yet. Riley," she deflected, her voice taking on that incredibly familiar, weaponized guilt she used like a scalpel. "My son is lying broken in a hospital bed, and instead of just getting in your car and helping, you are interrogating me. Why does everything always have to be a grand investigation with you? Every single time you have to cross-examine me for an hour before you agree to lift a single finger for your own flesh and blood. I just need to know where to drive." "Mom," I said, keeping my voice painfully calm and even. "Just head south on Interstate 65, she instructed coldly, dismissing my logic entirely. "I will text you the address when you are actually on the road. Just come get the bag first." "Okay, I will be at your house in 20 minutes, Riley." Her voice dropped an entire octave, losing all remaining traces of maternal panic. It was dead, flat, and serious. "Do not open the backpack." I froze. The phone pressed hard against my ear. The bag we packed for him. Do not open it under any circumstances. The zipper is incredibly fussy, and if you mess with it, it will break, and his things will spill out everywhere. Just grab it by the handle and go straight to your car." Before I could formulate a single word of response, the line went dead. I stood alone in my bedroom, staring at the dark screen of my phone. A cold, hard knot formed in the pit of my stomach. A fussy zipper. It was the flimsiest, most pathetic lie she had ever attempted to feed me. If a canvas bag contains a phone charger, a change of clean underwear, and a toothbrush, you do not care if someone looks inside it. You only explicitly warn someone not to look when the contents cannot withstand the light of day. I drove across town in the pitch-black pre-dawn darkness. The streets of Indianapolis were completely desolate and slick with a freezing light drizzle. I pulled my sedan into my parents' familiar driveway just before 5 in the morning. The house was quiet, but the warm yellow glow of the kitchen lights spilled out onto the wet front lawn, cutting through the gloom. I walked up the concrete steps, my boots making soft sounds, and reached for the brass door knob. It turned easily in my hand. The front door was completely unlocked. This was anomaly number 2. Grant Hall was a deeply paranoid man who locked his doors twice, obsessively checking the heavy deadbolts every single night before going to sleep. Leaving the front door wide open in the middle of the night was something he would simply never do. I pushed the heavy door open, calling out tentatively into the hallway. Dad, are you here?" Only silence answered me. The house felt entirely hollow, humming quietly with the low vibration of the kitchen refrigerator. I walked slowly through the living room toward the kitchen archway. There was no sign of my mother crying at the dining table. There was no sign of my father furiously pacing the floorboards while on the phone with the state police. The house was utterly, entirely deserted. Then I turned my head and saw it. Sitting dead center on the worn leather couch in the living room was a dark canvas backpack. It was perfectly upright, its straps tucked away, positioned directly under the glow of a single brass reading lamp. It looked entirely staged. It was placed there with absolute chilling precision, illuminated like a critical prop on a dark theater stage, waiting patiently for exactly one person to walk into the room, pick it up, and carry it away without asking a single question. I stood frozen in the entryway, the heavy silence of my childhood home pressing down violently on my shoulders. My mother's cold voice echoed relentlessly in my head. "Do not open the backpack." My heart hammered painfully against my ribs, a primal ancient instinct screaming at me that the exact moment my bare hand touched that rough canvas fabric, I was crossing a dangerous line I could never ever walk back from. I was the senior fraud reviewer. I spent every day of my life looking for the trap, and standing there staring at that solitary bag sitting in an empty, unlocked house. I knew with absolute terrifying certainty that I was walking straight into one. The moment my hand closed around the thick nylon handle at the top of the dark canvas, my muscles braced for the negligible weight of cotton shirts and perhaps a pair of worn sneakers. Instead, my shoulder jerked sharply downward. The bag was incredibly dense. It possessed a hostile, unreasonable gravity. When I hoisted it off the leather cushion of my parents' couch, the contents inside did not shift, crumple, or settle with the soft, predictable slump of folded laundry. It possessed a rigid, dead weight. It felt exactly like hauling a piece of industrial machinery, a compact block of solid matter that pulled toward the floorboards with aggressive force. I adjusted my grip, my knuckles instantly turning a stark white under the kitchen lights, and hauled it out the front door. I tossed it onto the passenger seat of my sedan, where it landed with a blunt, hard, unapologetic thud. There was no rustle of fabric, just a solid, heavy impact. Rain lashed violently against my windshield as I merged my car onto Interstate 65, heading south into the suffocating darkness. The sky was bleeding from a pitch black into a bruised, sullen purple. The dashboard clock glowed a neon blue, marking the slow passage of early morning hours. My phone, resting face up in the center console, began to vibrate. It buzzed against the plastic, a harsh, demanding sound. Then it vibrated again and again. I tapped the screen while idling at a red light just before the highway on-ramp. It was a relentless barrage of text messages from Audrey. Keep moving. Do not pull over for anything. Make sure you bring that exact backpack inside the minute you arrive. I stared at the glowing text bubbles. There was not a single message asking if I was safe driving in the freezing rain. There was no reminder to be careful because the roads were slick. Most glaringly, there was absolutely no update on the brother who was supposedly clinging to life in a trauma ward. There was just cold, frantic directions centered entirely around the mysterious cargo sitting inches from my right arm. By the time I hit the 6 p.m. marker, the creeping anxiety in my gut had completely morphed into a suffocating pressure wrapping around my throat. My mother had finally texted me the name of the medical facility, Cumberland Regional Medical Center, situated just over the state border. I connected my phone to the car's wireless system and commanded the digital assistant to call the hospital's main switchboard. A tired, nasal-sounding woman answered on the second ring, her voice echoing through my car speakers. I kept my voice incredibly steady, utilizing my best, most authoritative professional cadence. I asked to be connected to the recovery room of Mason Hall, or if he was still currently in the emergency department, to the main trauma desk. I waited. The hold music was a scratchy instrumental track that looped endlessly, grating against my already frayed nerves. After 3 agonizing minutes of waiting, the operator returned to the line. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. I have checked the emergency intake roster, the intensive care database, and all general admissions for the past 24 hours. We do not have any patient registered under the name Mason Hall." A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I asked her to check aliases. I asked her to check the roster for unidentified individuals brought in from recent major traffic collisions. I begged her to double-check the exact spelling. "I assure you, there is absolutely nothing matching that description in our system." The operator confirmed, her tone softening with genuine pity. "Are you certain he was brought to Cumberland?" I ended the call. I immediately dialed my mother's cell phone. It rang 4 times and went straight to a generic automated voicemail. I dialed my father's number next. Same exact result. I tried them both again, my thumb jabbing the digital screen with increasing force. Nothing but the void. 5 minutes later, the text message tone chimed through the car's audio system. It was Audrey again. "Stop overcomplicating things. Stop making calls. Just get here with the bag." How could she possibly know I was making calls? Was she tracking my phone's location? Was she just anticipating my natural, deeply ingrained instinct to verify facts? My fingers itched from gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly. Stop overcomplicating things. That specific phrase was the ultimate whole family weapon. It was their universal mantra, whenever I started asking entirely too many logical questions. And lately, over the past few months, I had been asking an awful lot of them. The memories started flashing through my mind rapidly, aligning perfectly like heavy metal tumblers falling into place inside a complex vault lock. 6 months ago, I remembered my father casually cornering me in the garage, reeking of diesel, fuel, and stale coffee, asking me to sign my name as a primary guarantor on a massive new fleet loan for hull recovery and storage. He called it a temporary formality, sliding the dense legal paperwork across the hood of a wrecked car. 3 months ago, my mother had called asking for my social security number to update the familial beneficiaries on a confusing life insurance policy I had never even heard of. Just last week, Grant had aggressively pressured me to look over a tiny vendor contract that involved moving impounded vehicles across multiple state lines. It was a document so legally convoluted, so full of glaring liabilities and shadow corporations that I had flatly refused to put my initials anywhere near it. They always needed my pristine credit score. They needed my spotless background check. They needed my untarnished corporate reputation to legitimize whatever dirty hustle they were currently running. I took the very next exit, a desolate, poorly paved off-ramp sitting right on the Kentucky state border. I pulled my sedan into a brightly lit but entirely empty gas station, parking at the furthest possible pump away from the sleepy cashier inside the glass booth. The rain had turned into a steady, freezing downpour, drumming heavily on the metal roof of my car. I threw the gear shift into park, but left the engine running. The heater blasted warm air directly into my face, but it did absolutely nothing to thaw the solid block of ice forming in my veins. I turned my head slowly and stared at the passenger seat. The backpack sat there in the shadows, silently mocking my intelligence. The heavy black zipper running across its top was completely intact. It looked like a physical boundary line drawn right down the middle of my existence. On this side of the zipper, I was still just a concerned older sister running a stressful errand for a family in crisis. But on the other side of that teeth-locked scene lay a truth that could violently and permanently derail the rest of my natural life. If I pulled that tab, I could never unsee what was inside. I could never sit in a courtroom and honestly plead ignorance. I sat completely motionless for a full 10 minutes. The rhythmic mechanical swish of the windshield wipers was the only sound inside the sealed cabin. But the golden, unbreakable rule of my corporate profession was screaming at a deafening volume inside my head. It was a core principle that had saved my employers millions of dollars. And it was the exact same principle that had saved my own career countless times. When someone is absolutely terrified of you looking at a specific financial ledger, that ledger is exactly where the devastating fraud is buried. When someone goes drastically out of their way to build a towering brick wall in front of you, you do not politely walk around it. You find a sledgehammer and you tear it down. I took a deep, shuddering breath and reached my right hand across the center console. My fingers trembled just slightly as they gripped the cold metal tab of the zipper. I pulled. It was not fussy at all. There was no snag, no resistance. It slid open with a smooth, terrifyingly quiet ease. I pulled the stiff canvas edges apart, peering into the dark opening. The top layer was a dark, heavy, fleece-lined winter jacket. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to my father, not my brother. It smelled faintly of motor, oil, and cheap cologne. Carefully, utilizing just my thumb and index finger to minimize contact, I pinched the hem of the thick jacket and peeled it back to reveal the bottom of the bag. My breath caught violently in my throat, choking off the oxygen to my brain. My heart slammed against my ribs with such brutal force that it physically hurt my chest. Lying beneath the false protective layer of clothing was not a random collection of innocent hospital necessities. There were no plastic toiletries, no tangled phone chargers, no clean socks folded neatly for a wounded man. Instead, nestled snugly in the dark belly of the canvas bag were items that completely and irrevocably shattered the pathetic illusion of a tragic highway accident. I was staring straight down at a calculated collection of objects that no innocent citizen on earth ever packed to go visit the sick. It was a catastrophic nightmare perfectly arranged in a nylon sack, waiting patiently to destroy the person holding it. The pale yellow dome light of my car illuminated a nightmare. My eyes darted across the contents, processing the visual data with the cold, ruthless speed of a professional investigator. Staring back at me from the dark nylon depths was a heavy black plastic square with a dark, unblinking glass lens. It was a police body camera. Right next to it lay a bulky smartphone encased in thick military rubber, its screen completely dark and visibly powered off. Tangled in the heavy strap of the body camera was a long, jagged brass key attached to a bright yellow plastic tag, the exact kind used exclusively for municipal evidence lockers. Beneath the key, a thick, tightly compressed brick of paper money sat bound by a purple bank strap. I could clearly see the bold ink on the band indicating $10,000 and $100 bills. Rounding out this apocalyptic collection was a pair of heavy leatherwork gloves, the fingers curled inward and caked with thick, dried brown mud. My pulse hammered a chaotic rhythm against my eardrums. My analytical mind, entirely bypassing panic, automatically scanned the perimeter of the bag. I peeled back the flap of a secondary smaller mesh pocket on the side. I noticed a slight jagged tear in the inner lining. I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes, absolutely refusing to let my skin brush the fabric. Pushed deep inside the frayed stitching, catching just a microscopic sliver of the overhead light, was a tiny black memory card. That tiny square of plastic changed the entire context of the canvas bag. Someone had not simply thrown these items together in a blind rush. They had meticulously and deliberately concealed the digital memory. The person who packed this bag was not just transporting stolen goods. They were actively trying to hide the most vital piece of the puzzle within the puzzle itself. The air inside the sedan suddenly felt entirely too thin to breathe. I snapped my hand back, as if the canvas was made of burning coals. I grabbed the metal tab and zipped the bag completely shut in one swift, violent motion. In my line of work, we have an unbreakable rule regarding the chain of custody. The exact moment your fingerprint lands on a forged financial document, the opposing counsel will argue you forged it yourself. If my biological trace ended up on a missing officer's phone or a brick of illicit cash, I would instantly transform from a concerned citizen reporting a bizarre trap into the primary suspect of a major felony. I shoved the bag violently toward the passenger door, putting as much physical distance between myself and the trap as the small cabin allowed. I was completely done playing the obedient daughter. I slammed the gear shift into drive and peeled out of the desolate gas station, my tires screeching loudly against the wet, slick pavement. I ignored the glowing digital map on my dashboard that was still stubbornly routing me toward a phantom medical center. Instead, I merged back onto the local highway and headed straight for the glowing blue lights of a municipal building I had passed roughly 10 miles back. The illuminated sign had read Clay Junction Police Department. The station was a low, brutalist concrete block sitting at the edge of a sleepy rain-soaked commercial district. I parked directly in front of the main entrance, leaving my headlights glaring against the wet brick wall. I grabbed the thick straps of the backpack, carrying it delicately by the very top loop to avoid touching any functional surface, and pushed through the heavy glass double doors. The lobby was painfully bright, reeking of harsh industrial bleach and stale coffee. Behind a thick, scratched wall of bulletproof glass sat the desk sergeant. He was a large, heavy-set man in his late 50s, his uniform slightly wrinkled at the collar. He looked incredibly bored and thoroughly exhausted, resting his chin on his palm and blinking slowly at me as I approached his window. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his voice a low, growly rumble that suggested he had been sitting in that exact rolling chair for at least 12 hours. "I need to turn over some items," I said, my voice shockingly steady despite the adrenaline vibrating intensely through my bones. I slid the heavy canvas bag onto the metal counter beneath the speaker grate. It landed with that same dense, sickening thud. The sergeant sighed heavily, clearly expecting a lost wallet, a set of keys, or a recovered bicycle. "All right, what exactly do you have there?" I looked him dead in the eyes, stripping every ounce of emotion from my tone. "I just opened this bag. Inside there is a large bundle of cash, a pair of dried mud-stained gloves, an evidence locker key, and an official police uniform body camera. The sheer boredom vanished from his face in a fraction of a second. His posture snapped entirely rigid. His spine hitting the back of his chair, the tired droop of his eyelids disappeared, instantly replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. He did not say a single word. He simply stood up, his heavy-duty belt clinking loudly against the desk, and walked briskly to the secure steel door at the side of the glass partition. The electronic lock buzzed sharply, and he stepped out into the main lobby with me. He approached the metal counter with extreme caution. He reached out with a thick, calloused finger and gently hooked the zipper tab, pulling it back just a couple of inches. He leaned forward and peered into the narrow, dark opening. He looked for exactly 1 second, one single solitary heartbeat. When he raised his head, the blood had completely drained from his face. His skin had turned a sickly ashen gray under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked exactly like a man who had just watched a corpse rise from the linoleum floor. The subtle everyday authority of a tired desk cop was entirely gone, replaced by a raw, naked terror. "Do not touch this bag again," he ordered, his voice suddenly sharp, breathless, and completely stripped of its previous calm. He immediately reached for the radio microphone clipped to his shoulder, dispatched, locked down the front desk, shut the main doors. "I need the shift commander and the duty captain in the lobby right this second." He did not wait for a reply from the radio. He reached over the counter and slammed his open palm against a heavy red button mounted on the wall. A loud metallic locking mechanism echoed violently through the room as the main entrance doors sealed shut behind me. He turned back to me, his hand hovering instinctively near his holstered weapon, though his eyes were locked entirely on mine. "Ma'am, step away from the counter and come with me right now," he commanded. He escorted me quickly and roughly through the security door, leading me down a narrow, brightly lit hallway. We bypassed the regular holding cells and the open bullpen entirely. He brought me straight into a soundproof, windowless private room at the very back of the precinct. He left me alone in the freezing room, locking the heavy metal door firmly behind him. I sat down on the cold, steel chair, the profound silence of the room pressing heavily against my eardrums. I had spent 8 years of my life analyzing human behavior, reading the subtle micro-expressions of desperate people caught in a lie. But what I had just witnessed on that veteran police officer's face was not deception. It was absolute, unadulterated dread. He recognized that body camera. He recognized exactly what its presence inside a civilian's backpack meant. Sitting alone in that sterile room, the final devastating piece of the puzzle snapped violently into place. My parents had not just orchestrated a petty financial scam to skim a few thousand in insurance money. They had not merely drafted me to take the fall for a minor corporate fraud charge. That single second of sheer panic from a seasoned cop told me everything I needed to know. I had just walked straight into the epicenter of a massive catastrophic conspiracy, and my own family had eagerly volunteered me to be the one buried alive when the walls finally collapsed. The heavy steel door finally clicked open after what felt like an eternity. A woman walked in carrying a thick manila folder and a sleek silver laptop. She did not wear a standard uniform. Instead, she wore a sharp charcoal gray blazer over a crisp white blouse. Her badge was clipped to her leather belt, sitting right next to a holstered sidearm. She had the kind of eyes that had seen the absolute worst of human nature and remained entirely unfazed by it. "I am Detective Mara Keene," she said, her voice brisk and entirely devoid of any comforting warmth. She pulled out the metal chair opposite mine and sat down, placing her items on the table. "I am with the State Anti-Corruption Task Force, working directly alongside Internal Affairs. You brought us a very interesting piece of luggage tonight, MS." I kept my posture completely rigid, refusing to let my exhaustion show. "I brought you a trap." Keene nodded slowly, flipping open the heavy manila folder. "We process the serial number on the body camera you surrendered. It belongs to Deputy Noah Mercer. He is a patrol officer who specifically works the county lines. He has been officially missing for exactly 48 hours. He vanished right after his Friday night shift. There has been no radio contact. There has been no cellular phone activity. His cruiser was found abandoned behind an empty commercial strip mall yesterday morning. A heavy, suffocating silence swallowed the room. A missing cop. It was the absolute worst-case scenario in law enforcement. Deputy Mercer was not just out there writing speeding tickets, Keene continued, leaning forward and resting her forearms on the table. For the last 6 months, he had been quietly building a massive case on a highly organized auto theft and insurance fraud ring operating right on the border of Indiana and Kentucky. The operation involved staging minor traffic accidents, utilizing predatory towing practices to legally hijack the vehicles, and then shuffling those impounded cars across state lines until the paperwork completely dissolved into thin air. By the time the insurance companies paid out the massive claims, the vehicles were already stripped for parts or resold through anonymous shell companies. My stomach twisted into a painful, icy knot. I knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Your father's business, whole recovery and storage, has been a glaring red flag in our peripheral vision for a very long time, Keene stated bluntly. His company name showed up in dozens of suspicious incident reports. Vehicles towed by his trucks had a bizarre, recurring habit of vanishing from the impound lots before the claims adjusters could ever get a look at the actual damage. We knew the yard was dirty. Mercer knew it was dirty, but we never had the hard physical proof to secure a judge's signature for a search warrant. The ring operators were incredibly careful. They kept their ledgers clean and their digital footprint virtually non-existent. Until tonight, until my mother told me not to open a canvas bag. My mother called me at 4 in the morning. I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet echoing harshly against the soundproof walls. She told me my brother Mason was in a severe accident. She said he was bleeding in a hospital down south. He looked at me with a mixture of professional pity and sharp analytical calculation. There is no accident on record anywhere in the tri-state area. We ran his name through dispatch the second we realized who you were. Furthermore, we pulled the emergency cellular tower data from Mason Hall just 10 minutes ago. His phone has not pinged anywhere near a medical facility. The very last location his device registered right before it was intentionally powered down was less than a mile from the back gates of your father's tow yard. The illusion shattered completely into a million jagged pieces. The pathetic, helpless image of my little brother bleeding on a hospital stretcher evaporated, replaced by a much darker, far more sinister reality. Mason was not a victim waiting for his big sister to ride in and save him. He was completely unharmed. Keene turned the laptop around so the hide screen faced me. Our forensic technician managed to pull the encrypted data off the hidden micro SD card you pointed out. The camera itself was smashed and intentionally disabled, but the card miraculously survived the impact. We managed to salvage a few seconds of corrupted video from Friday night. She pressed a key. The screen flickered to life, displaying a dark, grainy, chaotic night scene, illuminated only by the harsh, sweeping glare of a police cruiser's headlights. The camera was mounted directly on Mercer's chest, bobbing slightly as he walked forward. Through the driving rain, the massive, unmistakable silhouette of a heavy-duty tow truck loomed in the center of a deserted access road. The yellow flashing lights on the truck's roof cut sharply through the darkness. Mercer's voice crackled through the laptop speakers, sharp, loud, and authoritative. Step away from the winch. Keep your hands exactly where I can see them. Mason Hall. A figure stepped out from the deep shadow of the truck's chassis. It was a brief, blurred glimpse, but I did not need perfect resolution to recognize the slouching posture and the familiar shape of my brother's jawline. Before Mason could raise his hands, a second much larger shadow moved rapidly from the periphery of the frame. The camera jerked violently upward toward the dark sky. A sickening wet crunch echoed loudly through the audio feed. The image tumbled wildly, capturing a chaotic blur of wet asphalt and heavy work boots before cutting out to complete, dead static. The video ended. The reflection of my own pale face stared back at me from the black screen. Your brother is not the victim in this scenario, Keene said softly, though the words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He is the prime suspect in the assault and potential homicide of a sworn law enforcement officer. He was standing right there when Deputy Mercer went down. I pressed my hands flat against the cold metal table, trying desperately to stop the violent tremor shaking my arms. Then why involve me? Why pack that bag and force me to drive it south? They could have just burned the evidence. They could have thrown it in the river. Keene closed the laptop with a sharp snap. Because destroying physical evidence is incredibly risky. Things wash up on river banks. Things survive. But framing a scapegoat that solves multiple problems at once. Let us look at the facts of their brilliant plan. You are driving south, crossing state lines in the middle of the night. You have a massive bundle of untraceable cash, a missing officer's battered communication gear, the key to an active evidence locker, and gloves covered in dried mud. You also have a heavily documented history of helping your family navigate tricky financial paperwork. She paused, letting the absolute horror of her words sink deep into my skin. If you had kept driving, Keene continued, her gaze pinning me to the chair, we would have eventually received an anonymous tip about a suspicious vehicle leaving the whole residence. A state trooper would have pulled you over on the highway. They would have searched your car. They would have found the murder kit sitting right on your passenger seat. My throat tightened so intensely I could barely swallow. They wanted me to be arrested. They wanted you to be the absolute end of the line. Keene corrected, her tone grim and unyielding. With you caught red-handed, holding the stolen police property and the dirty money, the prosecutors would have had their neat, tidy conclusion. The investigation into the towing company would have abruptly shifted entirely onto you. Your parents would have played the devastated, heartbroken family for the cameras. They would have claimed you were the secret mastermind moving their illicit funds. And they had absolutely no idea you had gotten violent with a police officer to protect your scam. You would have gone to federal prison for the rest of your natural life, and your brother would have walked away completely clean. The air in the interrogation room felt utterly toxic. A cold, suffocating realization washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins my entire life. I had accepted the heavy burden of being the reliable one. I had paid Mason's legal fees. I had balanced my father's convoluted tax returns. I had listened to my mother's endless, manipulative lectures about family loyalty and sticking together no matter what. I thought I was their shield, but sitting in that sterile police station, looking at the undeniable proof of their treachery, I finally understood the terrifying truth. They did not love my strength. They did not value my fierce loyalty. They only saw my clean criminal record and my blind, conditioned obedience as the perfect raw materials for a human sacrifice. When the severe consequences of their greed finally caught up with them, they did not hesitate for a single second to feed me to the wolves. They had called me in the middle of the night, weaponizing the sacred bond of family, specifically to dig my grave so Mason would not have to sleep in it. I did not shatter. Sitting in that freezing interrogation room, staring at the blank screen of the detective's laptop, I felt the exact opposite of a breakdown. The profound, suffocating grief of realizing my own blood had betrayed me burned away in a matter of seconds, leaving behind something entirely different. It was a cold, hyper-focused clarity. For over 2 decades, I had been the family dumping ground. I was the one who balanced the checkbooks, navigated the legal jargon, and kept the whole family afloat while they mocked my rigid adherence to the rules. They genuinely believed my obedience was a sign of weakness. They thought they could use my spotless reputation as a disposable shield because they fundamentally misunderstood what I did for a living. I did not just read paperwork. I hunted liars, and they had just given me the ultimate motivation to turn my crosshairs on them. I looked across the metal table at Detective Keene. She was watching me closely, clearly expecting the standard civilian reaction. She was waiting for the tears, the hysterical denial, or the desperate plea for a lawyer. I gave her none of those things. You do not have the complete picture, I told her, my voice eerily calm. You have a missing deputy and a dirty toward, but you do not know how they are moving the money. You do not know how they are cleaning it. My family operates on chaos, but massive fraud requires extreme discipline. Someone is washing the funds, and I guarantee you, they left a digital trail. Let me look at their records. Keene raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her hardened features. MS. Paul, you are currently implicated in a federal-level conspiracy. I cannot just hand you sealed, financial records. You do not need to. I countered immediately. I already had access. I have been filing my parents' joint tax returns for the last 10 years. I have all their login credentials, their banking routing numbers, and their digital signature keys saved on my secure personal cloud. If you put me in a safe room with a clean internet connection, I will map their entire shadow economy for you by sunrise. I am a senior fraud reviewer. I dismantle corporate embezzlement rings for breakfast. Let me dismantle this one. 2 hours later, I was sitting at a chipped-from-mica table in a heavily secured safe house on the outskirts of the county. The windows were bolted shut and covered with heavy blackout curtains. A state trooper stood guard outside the reinforced steel door. Keene had provided me with a heavily monitored encrypted laptop. I cracked my knuckles, took a sip of terrible black coffee from a styrofoam cup, and went to war against my own bloodline. I started with the seemingly innocent requests my parents had made over the past 3 years. I pulled up the digital archives of my father's towing company, Hall Recovery and Storage. I cross-referenced their operating expenses with their reported revenue. The math was blatantly atrocious. The tow yard was hemorrhaging cash on paper. Yet, my father had recently purchased 3 brand-new heavy-duty flatbed trucks, each worth over $150,000. The money was flowing in from a secondary hidden reservoir. I dove deeper into the familial tax portals, utilizing my own Social Security number to pull up any associated business entities. Within 45 minutes, I found the first massive glaring anomaly. It was a limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware. The name of the company was R Transit Advisory, Riley Hall. A wave of pure toxic disgust washed over me as I stared at the incorporation documents on the glowing screen. They had forged my digital signature. They had used my pristine credit history and my flawless corporate background to establish a phantom consulting firm. The LLC had 0 physical employees, no actual office space, and provided absolutely no tangible services. It existed for one single highly illegal purpose. It was a pass-through entity. I traced the banking routing numbers connected to the fake advisory firm. Every single month, Hall Recovery and Storage paid RH Transit Advisory exorbitant consulting fees, sometimes upwards of $20,000 a week. It was a classic expense padding maneuver to lower my father's taxable income while simultaneously moving dirty cash into a clean account under my name. But the money did not stay in my phantom account. Within 24 hours of every deposit, the funds were wired out again. I followed the outgoing wire transfers. They all funneled directly into a massive, heavily lawyered corporate umbrella called the Stonewake Development Group. Stonewake, I muttered aloud to the empty room, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. They were a massive commercial real estate conglomerate, buying up cheap land all over the state. Why was a local dirty tow truck operation funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into a corporate real estate beast? I opened a new tab and started pulling the public campaign finance records for the county. I cross-referenced the board of directors for Stonewake with the donut lists for local political races. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the linchpin. Stonewake Development Group was the primary financial backer for Preston Vale, the charismatic, tough-on-crime candidate currently running for the position of county sheriff. The political connection made the entire machine terrifyingly clear. The sheriff's department controlled the municipal towing contracts. If Preston Vale won the election, he would have absolute authority over which towers were called to clear accident scenes. Stonewake was using my father's dirty money to fund Vale's campaign. In return, Vale would ensure Hall Recovery maintained a total unquestioned monopoly on the county's lucrative dispatch calls. But it went even deeper than campaign finance. I was missing the initial catalyst. How were they generating the sheer volume of wrecked cars necessary to fund this entire operation? I pulled up a regional map and started plotting the specific locations of the accidents handled by Hall Recovery over the past 18 months. Red dots flooded the screen, but they were not randomly scattered across the perilous mountain highways or the busy interstate interchanges. The vast majority of the accidents were tightly clustered in one specific, highly concentrated geographical area, the Riverside District. Riverside was a struggling working-class neighborhood sitting on a massive stretch of prime waterfront property. I pulled up the municipal zoning board records. Stone-Wakeake Development Group had recently submitted a multi-million-dollar proposal to rezone the entire Riverside district for luxury condominiums and a high-end retail promenade. The final devastating revelation hit me with the force of a freight train. This was never just about insurance fraud. The staged accidents were a targeted weapon of economic warfare. I rapidly reviewed the names of the individuals whose cars had been towed from the Riverside area. I checked public property records. It was a systematic slaughter. My brother Mason and his crew were intentionally causing minor collisions with specific residents of the Riverside neighborhood. They targeted vulnerable people who were already drowning in debt. Once the accident occurred, my father's trucks would swoop in, hook the vehicle, and drag it to their secure impound lot. They would then hit the victim with astronomical towing fees, daily storage rates, and administrative penalties. The fees would rack up to thousands of dollars within days. A single mother working 2 jobs could not afford a $3,000 impound bill to get her Honda Civic back. Without a car, she lost her job. Without a job, she defaulted on her mortgage. The bank foreclosed on the Riverside property, or the desperate residents sold the land for absolutely nothing just to escape the crushing debt. And waiting in the shadows, ready to scoop up the foreclosed riverfront property for pennies, was the Stone-Wakeake Development Group. My family was not just stealing cars. They were the ground-level enforcers for a massive, brutal gentrification scheme. They were financially crippling an entire community, forcing people out of their generational homes so corrupt politicians and greedy developers could build luxury apartments over the wreckage. And they had built the entire money-laundering apparatus using my name. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale gray light through the edges of the blackout curtains when the heavy steel door unlocked. Detective Keene walked in holding 2 fresh cups of coffee. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the walls. I had requisitioned a massive rolling whiteboard from the guard outside. It was completely covered in a complex, terrifyingly precise web of black marker. I had drawn the entire financial ecosystem. The arrows flowed from the staged accidents in Riverside to the predatory towing invoices, through the Phantom R8 Transit Advisory LLC, straight into the coffers of Stone-Wakeake Development, and finally into the campaign accounts of Preston Vale. I stood in front of the board, my posture perfectly straight, pointing a black marker at the exact center of the conspiracy. Deputy No Mercer did not just stumble onto a chalk shop. I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. He found the financial link between the Tollard and the real estate developers. He was going to expose the fact that the next county sheriff is being bought and paid for with the blood and stolen property of the Riverside residents. That is why they had to get rid of him. And that is why they had to frame me to completely shut down the inquiry. Keene walked slowly toward the whiteboard, her eyes scanning the meticulous, undeniable proof of a massive criminal syndicate. She looked at the names, the dollar amounts, and the dates I had flawlessly charted. The skeptical, hardened look she had worn in the interrogation room was completely gone. She turned her head and looked at me. For the very first time since this nightmare began, a person in a position of supreme authority was not looking at me like a disposable asset, a naive daughter, or a convenient scapegoat. She was looking at me like a loaded weapon that had just been handed directly to the prosecution. "You built all of this in 6 hours," Keene whispered, genuine awe lacing her tone. "I told you," I replied, capping the black marker with a sharp snap. "I find the things people try to hide. Now, let us talk about how we are going to burn my family's empire straight to the ground." The digital recorder on the metal table flashed a steady, rhythmic red light. Detective Keene sat directly across from me, her arms crossed, nodding silently. I took a slow, deep breath, visualizing the terrified, obedient daughter I used to be, and pressed the call button on my cell phone. It rang exactly 1 time before my mother snatched it up. "Riley." "Oh, thank God." Audrey gasped, her voice trembling with an expertly crafted layer of exhaustion and relief. "Where are you? Why did you stop answering my messages?" I have been out of my mind with worry. I forced my voice to waver, injecting a high, tight note of panic into my throat. "Mom, I am pulled over. I am so scared." Things are not making any sense. The hospital you told me about, they said Mason is not even there. What is going on? Listen to me, sweetheart. Audrey cuped, immediately deploying the soft, suffocating tone she had used to control me since I was 7 years old. It was the exact same voice she used when she needed me to empty my meager savings account to cover one of Mason's bounce checks. Everything is incredibly complicated right now. The police are involved, and they're making a massive mess out of a simple misunderstanding. But we can solve this in-house. We just need you to be brave. Brave about what? I whimpered, staring blankly at the cold concrete wall of the safe house. You are the strongest one in this family. Riley, she continued, laying the guilt on with a heavy tell. You have always been our rock. This family is counting on you right now more than ever. Your brother made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But if you do not do exactly what I say, they are going to lock him away. Do not let your brother lose his entire future. You know his heart. You know he does not deserve to be ruined over one bad night. The sheer audacity of her manipulation made my skin crawl. She was actively setting me up to take a federal fall. Yet she was framing it as my moral obligation to save the golden boy. Before I could respond, the phone fumbled, the line crackled, and my father's rough, growly voice replaced my mother's. Grant Hull possessed absolutely no talent for emotional theater. He was a man of cold, hard logistics. Riley, Grant barked, skipping the fake pleasantries entirely. Where is the bag right now? It is in the passenger's seat, Dad. I lied smoothly, but I am freaking out. Did you open it? He demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, threatening register. Did you touch the zipper? Did you look inside the side compartment? No, I cried out, maintaining the illusion of a cornered animal. I just grabbed the handle like Mom said. But the gas station attendant looked at me funny, and I panicked. Get back on the road, Grant ordered coldly. Do not speak to anyone else. Do not stop for coffee. Just drive south until I send you the exact drop location. He paused, breathing heavily into the receiver, then in the background, muffled but entirely distinct. A third voice drifted through the audio feed. It was a male voice, casual and slightly annoyed. Tell her not to take the main road down by the way station. The state troopers always run random checks there on Saturday mornings. My lungs completely stopped working. The blood roaring in my ears went dead silent. That was Mason. My little brother was not lying unconscious in a sterile trauma ward. He was not tied up in a police precinct being fiercely interrogated. He was standing right next to my father in the comfort of our family kitchen, offering helpful logistical advice on how best to traffic the evidence of his own violent crime. His voice was perfectly healthy. There was no pain, no grudginess, no fear, just the mild irritation of a man trying to manage a stressful delivery schedule. I have to go. I choked out and ended the call before they could analyze the sudden lethal shift in my tone. I set the phone down on the table. Keene paused the recorder. That single careless background sentence wiped away the very last stubborn illusion I harbored. Up until that exact second, a tiny, pathetic fraction of my heart had still believed Mason was merely a pawn. I had desperately wanted to believe that my parents were acting out of a twisted protective panic, keeping Mason entirely in the dark while they sacrificed me to save him. But Mason knew he was standing right there in the room, actively participating in the precise routing of my destruction. He had likely helped pack the cash. He had probably zipped the canvas shut himself. Less than 2 hours later, my phone vibrated against the metal table. The caller ID displayed an unknown local number. Keene gave me a sharp nod, and I answered, putting it on speakerphone. Riley, a woman whispered. Her voice was incredibly fragile, trembling so violently I could barely understand the syllables. It is June. June Mercer. I recognized the name instantly. June was Mason's ex-girlfriend. They had dated for almost 3 years before she finally grew exhausted by his erratic behavior and quietly left him a few months ago. More importantly, she was the younger sister of Deputy Noah Mercer. June, where are you? Are you safe? I asked, my professional instincts immediately locking onto her terror. I am sitting in my car behind the old textile mill. She sobbed softly. I do not know who else to call. The police are asking questions about Noah, and I am so scared. Riley, I think Mason did something horrific. Keene leaned forward, her eyes narrowing sharply. June, my name is Detective Keene. I am sitting right here with Riley. You need to tell us exactly what you saw. A sharp intake of breath echoed over the speaker. 2 nights ago on Friday, I went to the tow yard. Mason still had a box of my winter clothes in his office locker, and I just wanted to get my things and leave before he started an argument. It was pouring rain. I parked around the back near the scrap heap so he would not see my car right away. She paused to swallow hard, fighting back a wave of nausea. The massive flatbed wrecker was parked near the rear garage. June continued, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Mason was standing behind it. He had the industrial pressure washer turned all the way up. He was spraying down the massive steel winch and the thick towing cable. The runoff water hitting the asphalt under the bright security lights was not brown from mud. It was dark red. It was thick. It was blood. A heavy silence filled the safe house. The video Keene had shown me earlier flashed behind my eyes. The violent jerk of the camera, the sound of the brutal impact. Did he see him? Keene asked sharply. No, June cried. I hid behind a pile of rusted fenders. But before he turned around to grab the soap brush, I pulled out my phone. I zoomed in as far as the lens would go and took one picture of the back of the truck. Then I ran to my car and drove away. June, I need you to describe exactly what is in that photograph, I said, keeping my tone incredibly steady to anchor her escalating panic. The heavy steel bumper on the right side is completely caved in, she explained, her words rushing out in a frantic stream. And caught directly in the heavy iron towing hook wedged deep in the metal is a torn piece of dark blue fabric. It has a thick silver reflective stripe sewn across the middle. It is a piece of a county sheriff uniform. It is my brother's uniform. Riley, she broke down entirely then, her sobs echoing harshly out of the small speaker. I stared at the black screen of my phone, the image of that torn, bloody piece of fabric burning a permanent hole in my mind. The whole family had run over a police officer, a man who was actively trying to stop them from destroying an entire neighborhood. Mason had washed the man's blood off a steel cable while my mother sat inside the house, meticulously drafting a script to trick her own daughter into carrying the murder weapon across state lines. I looked up at the complex web of financial crimes I had drawn on the whiteboard earlier that morning. My primary goal had been self-preservation. I simply wanted to hand the police enough evidence to clear my own name and let the justice system handle the rest. I had wanted to walk away clean and never look back. But as the sound of June Mercer weeping for her broken brother filled the sterile room, something deep inside my chest snapped completely in half. Survival was no longer sufficient. Walking away was a coward's victory. My family had spent their entire lives treating me like a disposable utility. They had weaponized my love, exploited my loyalty, and confidently assumed I would quietly lay down and take the lethal injection they had prepared for me. I did not want a quiet arrest anymore. I did not want plea deals or sealed indictments. I wanted total catastrophic annihilation. I wanted to drag every single one of them out into the blinding light of day and force them to look at the monster they had created. I wanted to see my mother's perfect mask shatter. I wanted to see my father lose his empire. I wanted Mason to finally understand the agonizing weight of consequence. I ended the call with June, my hand completely steady. I looked across the table at Detective Keene. The terror of the morning was entirely gone, replaced by a cold surgical rage. We are changing the strategy, I told the detective, my voice ringing with a terrifying absolute authority. We are not going to arrest them at the tow yard. That is too quiet. They will just spin a web of lies and hire expensive lawyers to bury the truth in court delays. Keene raised an eyebrow. What exactly do you have in mind? My mother only cares about one thing more than money, I said, a dark, humorless smile touching the corner of my mouth. She cares about winning. She needs to feel superior. We are going to let her believe she has won. We are going to give her exactly what she wants right in front of the very people she is trying to impress. The forensic team did not just casually inspect the canvas backpack. They systematically dismantled it. I watched through a secure video feed in the safe house as a technician in a sterile white suit carefully unstitched the thick reinforced bottom lining of the bag, hidden completely out of sight, pressed perfectly flat between two rigid layers of industrial nylon, was a single crumpled piece of thermal paper. It was a prepaid rental receipt for a climate-controlled storage facility located 3 towns over Unit Number 42. Within 2 hours, Detective Keene sent a tactical strike team to breach the rolling metal door of that storage unit. They did not find stolen car parts or heavy weaponry. They found a meticulously organized administrative nightmare. The unit was essentially a shadow corporate office. The team hauled out 3 heavy fireproof locks and brought them directly to my secure room. I cracked the heavy steel lids and went straight to work. Inside, I found leather-bound transaction ledgers detailing every single predatory tow and extortionate impound fee over the last 4 years. I found large glossy topographical maps of the Riverside district with specific residential plots, circled in bright red ink matching the exact locations of the staged accidents. But the absolute crown jewel of the entire cache was a heavy silver backup hard drive tucked inside a waterproof plastic casing. Keen Cyber Division bypassed the rudimentary password protection in less than 10 minutes. When the decrypted file directory finally populated on my laptop screen, the air in the room grew incredibly still. Up until this exact moment, I had operated under the entirely logical assumption that my father, Grant Hall, was the brutal engine driving this syndicate. He owned the heavy tow trucks. He commanded the rough men who drove them. I assumed my mother was merely an accessory, a willing but passive accomplice who turned a blind eye to the dirt on his hands as long as the bank accounts remained full and the bills were paid. I was completely catastrophically wrong. The digital footprint on the hard drive painted a terrifying crystal-clear picture. Grant Hall was nothing more than the blunt physical instrument. He was the muscle. Mason was the reckless, impulsive liability who crashed the cars and caused the actual violence on the street. But the architect, the cold, calculating mastermind who negotiated directly with the Stonewake Development Group, who funneled the dark money into Preston Vale's political campaign, and who drafted the complex extortion matrices, was Audrey Hall. My mother. I opened a folder labeled Correspondence, my eyes scanning hundreds of archived email threads. The tone of the messages was chilling. Audrey did not speak like a frightened housewife caught up in a bad situation. She spoke like a ruthless corporate executive managing a hostile takeover. She dictated strict terms to Stonewake's shadow lawyers. She negotiated the exact percentage of kickbacks required to keep the local zoning board looking the other way. She was the absolute, unquestioned authority of the entire operation. Then my blood turned to solid ice. I opened a subfolder buried deep in the directory. Inside was a simple text document created just 48 hours ago, shortly after Deputy Noah Mercer was assaulted in the rain. It was a script. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring slightly as I read the words my mother had typed. It was the exact word-for-word dialogue of the frantic 4 in the morning phone call she had made to me. She had literally written in stage directions. She had explicitly noted when she should sound breathless, when she should invoke my deep sense of familial duty, and when she should abruptly change the subject if I asked for specific medical details about Mason. She had even written down a specific cue for Grant to yell in the background to add a layer of chaotic realism to the performance. It was not a desperate mother acting on raw panic to save her bleeding son. It was a perfectly rehearsed theater production, and I was the oblivious, highly targeted audience of one. The true depth of her psychological cruelty was revealed in a series of saved text messages between Audrey and Grant, discussing exactly what to do with the stolen police body camera and the illicit cash. Grant had initially suggested burying the physical evidence deep in the scrapyard. Audrey had immediately and aggressively vetoed the idea. I read her exact words, typed out in stark black letters on the glowing screen. The police will eventually tear the yard apart. We need a clean pawn. Riley is perfect. Her corporate record is completely spotless. No judge will ever believe she's part of the ring. But if she is caught with the bag crossing state lines, the physical evidence will permanently trap her. She is too rigid. She is too principled. She is much harder to control than Mason. If she takes the fall just this one time, the entire investigation ends with her, and everything will be solved. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal carved a hollow, echoing cavern directly in the center of my chest. I had spent my entire adult life agonizing over my family. I had lost countless hours of sleep trying to figure out how to protect them from their own terrible, reckless decisions. I had believed with every fiber of my being that despite their deep flaws, we were bound by a fundamental, unbreakable tether of familial love. But Audrey Hall did not possess a mother's heart. She possessed a predator's instinct. She had recognized my fierce loyalty, my intense need to fix broken things, and my pristine legal standing, and she had deliberately weaponized those exact traits against me. She had looked at the daughter she brought into the world and saw absolutely nothing but a high-quality disposable human shield. I leaned back in the hard metal chair, the harsh glare of the laptop screen reflecting off my eyes. Detective Keene stood silently in the corner of the room, watching the devastating truth wash over my face. She did not offer empty platitudes or professional apologies. She knew there were no words capable of fixing the catastrophic damage of a mother meticulously designing her own child's destruction. She planned every single syllable. I whispered, the words tasting like copper in my dry mouth. She knew exactly which psychological buttons to push to make me get in that car. She used my love for my brother to dig my grave. She is a sociopath, Riley, Keene said softly, stepping closer to the metal table. She built an entire criminal empire by manipulating the people closest to her. She used your father's business. She used your brother's aggression. And she intended to use your entire life as the final payment to keep herself out of a federal penitentiary. I looked back at the screen, staring directly at the words, clean porn. The profound, paralyzing grief that had threatened to completely consume me just an hour ago evaporated into thin air. It was instantly replaced by a brilliant, blinding white rage. It was a cold, pure, highly calculated anger that burned away every last trace of the obedient daughter I used to be. If Audrey Hall wanted a corporate executive to finalize her complex affairs, she was going to get one. But I was not going to execute her brilliant escape plan. I was going to execute the total, irreversible liquidation of her entire life. This changes the timeline, I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or emotion. I turned to Keene, my eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, unwavering intensity. We have the hidden ledgers. We have the internal communications. We have the absolute proof of her orchestration. But if we arrest her right now in the quiet of the morning, she will immediately spin it. She will hire the best defense attorney Stone Wakick money can buy. She will stand in front of a jury, cry perfect motherly tears, and claim she was terrified and forced into it by my abusive father. With this hard drive, we can tear that innocent defense apart, Key countered, gesturing to the silver box on the table. Tearing it apart in a courtroom takes 3 years of legal maneuvering, I replied, standing up abruptly from the table. I do not want to wait 3 years. I want her to lose absolutely everything in 3 seconds. I want the corrupt politicians she bought, the greedy developers she enriched, and the vulnerable people she manipulated to watch her empire burn to ash right in front of their eyes. I want to destroy the mask of the respectable suffering matriarch so thoroughly that she can never put it back on. Keene studied my face for a long, calculating moment. She recognized the sharp look in my eyes. It was the terrifying look of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose, and an entire world to burn. All right, Keene finally agreed, a dangerous razor-thin smile appearing on her lips. How exactly do we build the P? A sharp, heavy knock on the reinforced steel door of the safe house shattered the quiet hum of the laptop's cooling fan. The uniformed state trooper stepped into the room, his face grim, and handed Detective Keene a secure cellular device. Keene listened for a solid 2 minutes, her jaw clenching tighter with every passing second. She ended the call and placed the phone, face down on the metal table, staring at me with a look of profound, chilling realization. That was my secondary field team, Keene said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. They just finished canvassing your apartment building to ensure no one was waiting for you there. They spoke with your next-door neighbor, an elderly woman who walks her dog late at night. She told my officers she saw a man matching your father's exact description pacing the secure resident parking garage late yesterday evening. He was using a physical metal key to unlock the trunk of your sedan. My brow furrowed in total confusion. My father has not driven my car in 5 years, but he did keep a spare key from when I first bought it off the dealership lot. Why would he be in my trunk yesterday? I drove that exact car to their house this morning to pick up the backpack. Keene did not answer. She simply turned on her heel and marched out the door. I followed her closely, my heart rate accelerating with a fresh, sickening wave of dread. We walked out of the heavily guarded safe house and stepped into the secure concrete garage bay, where a tactical officer had parked my sedan just a few hours prior. Keene snapped on a pair of blue latex gloves. She walked to the rear of my car, popped the trunk latch, and lifted the heavy carpeted floorboard that concealed the spare tire compartment. Nestled perfectly inside the curved steel basin, resting right on top of the emergency jack, was a flat black canvas duffel bag. I stopped breathing. Keene reached down and pulled the heavy brass zipper open. The harsh fluorescent lights of the garage illuminated the absolute, undeniable proof of my family's pure malice. Stacked neatly inside the bag were thick bundles of cash, mostly $50 and $100 bills wrapped in clear plastic. Sitting right next to the money were 3 cheap prepaid cellular phones still in their plastic blister packaging. But the most devastating items were tucked inside a thick manila envelope. Keene pulled out several heavy notarized documents. I recognized the official county seal immediately. They were property transfer deeds from multiple residential lots located directly inside the Riverside district. The deeds officially transferred ownership of the foreclosed land straight into the holding accounts of RH, Transit Advisory, and right at the bottom of every single page, stamped in blue ink, was my perfectly forged signature. I backed away from the bumper of the car, my shoulder hitting the concrete pillar behind me. It was a 2-tier system, Keene stated, her voice devoid of all warmth as she catalogued the lethal evidence. They are incredibly thorough. If you somehow managed to talk your way out of the traffic stop with the backpack, or if you threw the backpack in a ditch and refused to deliver it, they had a fail-safe ready to deploy. They would have simply made an anonymous phone call from an untraceable number to our narcotics division, claiming a major money launderer was operating out of your apartment building. We would have pulled you over, searched your vehicle, and found the dirty cash in the forged Riverside deeds. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of it washed over me like freezing water. The backpack sitting on their living room couch was just the loud, obvious track. But this black duffel bag hidden in my trunk was the silent guillotine. They had engineered a scenario where my survival was mathematically impossible. Whether I was the obedient courier or the rebellious daughter, I was going to end the week in federal custody, permanently burying their crimes under my own name. We walked back into the safe house in absolute silence. I sat down at the laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a frantic, lethal energy. I had to know exactly when they planned to pull the final trigger. I dove back into the decrypted hard drive, bypassing the ledgers and focusing entirely on Audrey's personal calendar and encrypted email drafts. I found the endgame buried in a folder marked for the current month. It was an extravagant, highly secure digital itinerary for a black tie fundraising gala hosted by the Stonewick Development Group. The event was scheduled for tomorrow evening at the Grand Heritage Hotel downtown. The invitation explicitly listed the formal unveiling of the Riverside Revitalization Project. The keynote speaker for the evening was none other than Preston Vale, the corrupt candidate for county sheriff. I cross-referenced the date of the gala with the financial escrow accounts tied to whole recovery and storage. The timing was entirely intentional. A massive final payout from Stonewick was scheduled to hit my Phantom LLC account the exact morning following the gala. The email drafts outlined the final phase clearly the moment that money cleared. Audrey and Grant were going to wire the funds to an offshore holding company, pack their bags, and permanently relocate to a non-extradition territory. They were going to leave the state the very same day the police received the anonymous tip to search my car. Keene closed her heavy manila folder with a sharp, decisive slap. We have the forged deeds. We have the hidden ledgers. We have the body camera. And we have the audio recording of Mason proving he is not in a hospital. We have more than enough to secure the warrants. I am calling the district attorney right now. We are going to kick their front door off its hinges at noon today." "No," I said, my voice echoing sharply off the metal walls. Keene stopped, her hand hovering over her secure radio. "Excuse me. You cannot arrest them in their living room," I insisted, standing up and pacing the length of the small room. "If you raid their house today, my mother will immediately activate her defense strategy. She will hire a massive legal team using the money she already washed. She will stand in front of a judge and swear I am a disgruntled, greedy daughter who set up the Phantom LLC behind her back. She will claim I planted that hard drive in the storage unit to frame my own family. And in a quiet, sterile courtroom with enough expensive lawyers muddying the waters, she might actually create enough reasonable doubt to walk away. Riley, we have a mountain of forensic evidence," Keene argued, though her tone softened slightly, recognizing the absolute conviction in my eyes. "Forensics can be debated by paid experts." I fired back. "I am a fraud reviewer. I know exactly how defense attorneys dismantle paper trails. I refuse to spend the next 7 years of my life locked in civil and criminal litigation against my own mother, praying a jury believes me. I want her to publicly, undeniably admit what she did, and I want her to do it on the record." Keene crossed her arms, a look of deep skepticism settling on her features. "And how exactly do you propose we extract a voluntary confession from a criminal mastermind?" "We use her fatal flaw," I stated, leaning over the table and staring directly at the detective. "My mother is a master manipulator, but she is completely incapable of succeeding in silence. She suffers from a massive blinding hubris. She does not just want to destroy me. She wants me to know exactly how thoroughly she outsmarted me. She cannot resist the urge to take a victory lap." I tapped the screen of the laptop, highlighting the digital invitation to the Stoneweight Garler. "She is going to be at this fundraiser tomorrow night," I explained, the plan forming rapidly and flawlessly in my mind. "She wants to stand in that ballroom, drink expensive champagne, and watch Preston Vale announce the Riverside Project, knowing she is the secret architect behind the entire empire. She thinks I am currently driving south, terrified and completely under her control. We are going to let her keep believing that." Keene's eyes widened slightly as the sheer audacity of my proposal clicked into place. "You want to walk into that Garler? I am going to call her tomorrow afternoon," I continued, the cold rage in my chest solidifying into a weaponized focus. "I will tell her I found the second bag in my trunk. I will play the part of the hysterical, broken child who is begging for her mommy to fix the problem. I will tell her I am bringing all the evidence directly to her at the hotel because I am too terrified to hold on to it anymore." "It is an incredibly dangerous play," Riley Keene warned, leaning forward. "Brandt is a violent man. Mason is unpredictable and has already assaulted a deputy. If they even suspect for a fraction of a second that you are wearing a wire, they will not hesitate to hurt you." "They will not suspect a thing," I replied, my voice chillingly calm, "because I will not be acting. I know exactly how to play the terrified, submissive daughter. I have been practicing that exact role every single day of my life since I was a child. I will walk into that VIP room. I will hand her the bait, and I will let her monumental ego do the rest. I will force her to claim her prize right in front of your hidden microphones." I looked down at the forged deeds resting on the metal table, the false signature mocking my entire existence. My family had spent my entire life building a cage around me, completely confident that I would never find the strength to break the lock. They were right about one thing. I was not going to break the lock. I was going to lock them inside with me, and then I was going to burn the entire building to the ground. "I cannot take it anymore." I sobbed into the receiver, making sure my breath hitched in exactly the right pathetic way. "Mom, I found the second bag, the one in the trunk of my car. I know what is inside the backpack, too. I opened it. I am so scared." Audrey swallowed the bait whole. "You foolish girl," she hissed, her voice dripping with venomous disappointment. "I told you not to look. Now you see why you just need to follow instructions. Where are you right now? I am parked behind a motel. I lied, letting my voice tremble violently. I want to give it all back to you. I will give you the money, the deeds, the camera. Just please stop putting me in danger. Do not let them arrest me. Nobody is going to arrest you if you do exactly as I say, Audrey commanded, the smug satisfaction practically radiating through the cellular connection. There is a private charity gala tomorrow night at the Grand Heritage Hotel. I need you to bring everything you still have to the VIP lounge behind the main ballroom at exactly 8:00. Walk through the service corridor. Do not speak to anyone. Just hand it over and your father will fix this entire mess. 5 minutes after I disconnected the line, my screen illuminated with a secure text message from my father. Do not take it upon yourself to look into anything else tonight. Bring it all. No more questions. The absolute arrogance of that message sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Even now, knowing I had uncovered their lethal contingency plan, Grant Hall still firmly believed he could issue blunt orders and expect my blind compliance. An hour later, my phone vibrated again. It was Mason. Riley. Hey, it is me. His voice was coated in a sickening artificial sweetness. Mom told me you were completely falling apart. I am so sorry, sis. I never wanted you to be the one dealing with this. I did not want you involved. Then why did you let them pack my trunk, Mason? I cried, maintaining the shattered illusion of the heartbroken sister. It was Dad's idea. He deflected effortlessly, falling back on his lifelong habit of blaming everyone else for his own catastrophic choices. Just bring the stuff tomorrow, okay? Everything will be fine once we have the camera and that tiny memory card. My blood ran entirely cold, freezing the air in my lungs. I had never mentioned the hidden micro-memory card to my mother on the previous call. I had only mentioned the camera itself. Mason knew about the tiny card because he was the one who attacked Deputy Mercer in the freezing rain, and he knew exactly what the body camera had captured before he smashed it. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding back a wave of pure visceral disgust. I will bring it all, I whispered and ended the call. The following evening, Detective Keene and her technical team transformed me into a walking surveillance hub. Standing in the sterile, brightly lit bathroom of the safe house, a female officer carefully taped a microscopic audio transmitter directly to my breastbone. The adhesive pulled tightly against my skin, serving as a constant physical reminder of the lethal high-wire game I was about to play. Keene handed me a thick, heavy manila envelope. This is your bait, she explained, her sharp eyes locked directly onto mine. Inside are perfectly forged copies of the RH Transit ledgers, the Riverside property deeds, and banking wire transfers. We also placed a dummy hard drive in the bottom to give it weight. Your mother is a deeply paranoid woman. If you walk in empty-handed, she will shut down immediately and call for Grant. You need to make her believe you brought the very items that could destroy her empire. You hold this envelope tight against your chest. You make her beg you for it. She placed both hands firmly on my shoulders, dropping her voice to a deadly, serious whisper. Listen to me very carefully, Riley. Grant has a documented history of brutal violence. If he locks the door, if he moves aggressively toward you, or if you feel the situation spiraling out of your control for even 1 second, you use the exact phrase we agree upon. You look right at your mother and you say, Mom said, I still owe one thing. The absolute second those words leave your mouth, my tactical team will breach the room. We will be stacked right outside the corridor. Before I left for the hotel, I asked for 5 minutes entirely alone. I sat on the edge of the hard cot in the safe house, staring at my reflection in a small cracked mirror resting on the desk. I looked at the dark circles under my eyes, the pale skin and the rigid set of my jaw. I spent my entire childhood being the designated shock absorber for the whole family. I remembered being 12 years old, forced to hand over my birthday money to cover a neighbor's broken window Mason had smashed with a baseball bat. I remembered being 22, sitting in a stuffy lawyer's office, apologizing profusely on my father's behalf for a vendor contract he had intentionally and maliciously breached. I was always the one forced to yield. I was the one who stepped back. I was the one who scrubbed the blood off the floorboards so they could continue to pretend our house was spotless. Tonight was not just about aiding a federal police investigation. It was a profound, permanent emotional severance. I was walking into that opulent hotel room to amputate the rotting limb of my family tree. The Grand Heritage Hotel was a towering monument to excessive wealth, completely awash in glittering crystal, chandeliers, and impossibly expensive floral arrangements. I stepped out of an unmarked police sedan and walked up the grand marble staircase. I wore a simple tailored black dress and a pair of flat, leather shoes. I completely stripped my face of makeup. I needed to look small, defeated, and entirely unremarkable. I needed to look exactly like the obedient, terrified victim they expected to see walking through their door. The main ballroom was a chaotic, deafening sea of silk evening gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters floated effortlessly through the massive crowd, carrying silver trays filled with expensive champagne. Soft, rhythmic jazz music echoed off the vated ceilings, completely masking the venomous, ugly reality of the event. These people were drinking, laughing, and shaking hands, completely oblivious to the fact that the lavish riverside revitalization project they were celebrating tonight was built directly on top of the crushed livelihoods and stolen homes of desperate families. I kept my head down, clutching the thick manila envelope tightly against my chest. Every single nerve ending in my body was vibrating with a terrifying electric tension. It felt exactly like a guitar string being pulled tight enough to snap and take off a finger. I navigated through the dense crowd, my eyes scanning the perimeter for the heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge located near the back service corridor. The air grew noticeably colder and quieter as I stepped away from the main party. Two massive, broad-shouldered men in dark suits stood near the entrance of the private corridor, their hands resting comfortably near their waistbands. But they stepped aside the moment they recognized my face. Grant had clearly given his private security detail a highly accurate description of his pathetic, frightened daughter. I stood completely alone before the polished oak door of the VIP suite. My heart hammered violently against the hidden microphone taped to my chest. The muffled sounds of the garler faded away, leaving only the rushing sound of blood in my ears. I took one final shuddering breath. I knew with absolute terrifying certainty that the exact second I turned this heavy brass handle, there was absolutely no going back. Tonight, I would either successfully reclaim my name and my freedom, or my family would finally succeed in killing it for the very last time. I closed my eyes, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped straight into the blinding center of the storm. I stepped off the soft patterned carpet of the main ballroom and into the muted, heavy silence of the VIP lounge. The thick oak door sealed away the rhythmic jazz music and the clinking of expensive champagne glasses. Audrey stood near a massive marble fireplace, wearing a stunning dark emerald evening gown. She did not rush forward to embrace me. She did not ask if I was hurt, if I was followed, or if I was okay. Her eyes immediately locked onto the thick manila envelope clutched tightly against my chest. "Where is the brass key?" Audrey demanded, her voice sharp and devoid of any maternal warmth. "Give me the envelope, Riley, and give me the key right now." Before I could take a single step backward, Grant moved from the shadows near the wet bar. He pushed the heavy oak door completely shut, the deadbolt sliding into place with a loud metallic crack. He stood squarely in front of the only exit, crossing his massive arms over his tailored tuxedo. Mason was sitting on a plush velvet sofa in the corner. He was dressed in a sharp suit, completely uninjured, but his hands were shaking violently. He looked like a cornered animal, his terrified eyes darting endlessly toward the package in my hands. "I need to know what is actually happening," I whispered, forcing my shoulders to slump and my hands to tremble, playing the broken, panicked daughter to absolute perfection. "Please, Mom, I am so scared." Audrey rolled her eyes, a gesture of profound, ugly annoyance. "Everything would already be completely finished and dealt with if you had just been obedient like you usually are. Hand it over so your father can dispose of it, and we can leave this awful city." I squeezed the envelope tighter against my collarbone. "What did you do to Noah Mercer? What did you do to that police officer?" Mason suddenly snapped, his fragile nerves completely shattering under the immense pressure. He jumped up from the velvet sofa. I just bumped him with the wrecker. It was raining. He was trespassing behind the impound lot, poking around the crushed cars, and he absolutely would not let it go. Shut your mouth right now, Mason. Grant barked, his voice echoing like a gunshot in the enclosed room. He turned his furious glare toward me. He was a cop sticking his nose deep into our private business. Riley, we handled the problem. Now, give us the evidence before I take it from you. I looked directly at my mother, letting genuine tears of betrayal well up in my eyes, though I used them entirely as a weapon. But why did you put a second bag in the trunk of my car? Why did you open a fake company using my name? You were going to let me go to federal prison for your crimes. Audrey closed the distance between us, stepping directly into my personal space. The carefully crafted mask of the suffering protective matriarch completely dissolved, revealing the cold, arrogant predator underneath. She could not resist the overwhelming urge to gloat. I built a multi-million-dollar empire, Riley. Audrey sneered, her ego taking total control of her tongue. Do you honestly think the wealthy executives at Stonewake respect a greasy tow truck driver? They respect the flawless, impenetrable corporate shell I built using your pristine resume and your perfect credit score. And yes, I packed the cash and the forged Riverside property deeds in your trunk. I had to have an insurance policy securely in place just in case you suddenly decided to grow a spine and go to the police instead of delivering the backpack. You were always far too rigid for your own good. Now give me the files. I stopped shaking. I slowly lowered the manila envelope to my side. I straightened my spine, looking down into Audrey's cold, calculating eyes, and I completely dropped the terrified act. Mom said, I still owe one thing, I said clearly, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying authority. Audrey frowned, genuine confusion finally crossing her face. What are you talking about? The heavy oak door exploded inward with a deafening crash. Grant was thrown violently against the wallpapered wall as 6 heavily armored tactical officers swarmed into the VIP lounge, their weapons raised and sweeping the room. Detective Mara Keene walked in right behind them, her badge flashing under the crystal chandelier. At that exact second, the muffled jazz music out in the main ballroom abruptly died. Through the breached doorway, I heard the massive venue speakers crackle loudly to life. The audio feed from the hidden microphone taped to my chest echoed like thunder through the enormous hall. My mother's arrogant voice boomed over the crowd of hundreds of people, proudly admitting to building a criminal empire and intentionally framing her own daughter. Then a collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The giant projector screens mounted behind the main stage had been hijacked by Keene's technical team. They switched instantly from the glowing Stonewake Development logo to the dark, violet body camera footage of Mason attacking the deputy in the freezing rain. Audrey screamed in absolute fury, lunging toward me with her hands raised, but 2 tactical officers immediately grabbed her shoulders and pinned her arms roughly behind her back. Mason dropped to his knees on the expensive carpet, sobbing uncontrollably and begging for a lawyer. Grant did not fight. He simply stared blankly at the floor, the realization of his total, inescapable defeat paralyzing him. Then the chaotic crowd out in the hallway slowly parted. A man in a dark blue police uniform walked carefully through the shattered doorway. His right arm was secured in a heavy medical sling, and thick white bandages were visible beneath his collar. It was Deputy Noah Mercer. Mason choked on a sob, his face turning an impossible, sickly shade of white. Noah was not dead. He had survived the brutal hit and run, managing to crawl into a deep drainage ditch where a passing motorist found him hours later. He had been secretly recovering in a secure, guarded hospital wing while Detective Keene meticulously built the trap around my family. Noah looked down at Mason with eyes harder than stone. You hit me hard, kid, but you did not hit me hard enough. He turned his head and nodded to Detective Keene. That is the man who drove the tow truck. That is the man who tried to hide the evidence. And that is the woman who ordered the entire cover-up. Out on the brightly lit main stage through the parted oak doors, I watched 2 state troopers march up the steps and slap heavy steel handcuffs on Preston Vale, right in front of the flashing cameras of the local press and his horrified political donors. Audrey was completely losing her mind. She thrashed wildly against the officers holding her, screaming toward the open hallway where the wealthy real estate investors and the displaced Riverside residents working the catering staff had gathered to watch the spectacular downfall. "I did this for my family," Audrey shrieked, desperate to reclaim her narrative. "I was trying to protect us. We had nothing." Nobody bought it. A silence from the crowd was a heavy, suffocating, absolute condemnation. The catering staff, the very people whose lives she had destroyed for profit, watched her squirm with cold, unblinking satisfaction. I walked slowly over to where my mother was restrained. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I did not need to use violence. I simply looked down at the woman who had intentionally tried to bury me alive to save herself. For the very first time in my entire life, "Mother, I absolutely refuse to carry your mess," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical sobbing like a razor blade. "You are going to carry this one entirely by yourself." That single sentence hit her infinitely harder than any physical blow ever could. The absolute chilling finality in my voice shattered her remaining composure. Her knees buckled and she slumped forward, the reality of her total destruction finally crashing down on her shoulders. By the time the sun began to rise over the Indianapolis skyline, my entire life had been thoroughly and liberally scrubbed clean. The fraudulent RH Transit Advisory LLC was permanently dissolved. The stolen Riverside deeds were seized as federal evidence. Whole recovery and storage was chained, padlocked, and surrounded by yellow crime scene tape. The Stonewaight Development Group was in total financial freefall, their assets frozen by the state attorney general. I walked out of the Central Police Precinct and stood alone on the concrete steps. The morning air was freezing, biting sharply at my cheeks, but I had honestly never felt so incredibly light. The heavy, suffocating burden of the whole family was finally gone. I breathed in the cold air, a genuine smile touching my face. The good daughter had survived the nightmare simply by choosing the exact right moment to stop being good. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people. Thanks to all.